everyone, good evening. I'm Stephanie from SIM, and today I'll be the host for this masterclass session. We actually have about 17 plus participants now, so we'll start off with the session first. And for those who just joined in, welcome to the Masterclass series, season 5. And for your information, this is actually our very last masterclass for this season. But do take note that we actually have some recordings for the previous session. So if you still want to refer, you can still go to our YouTube channel next week, which we will be uploading together with this session. Okay, so the topic for today is dealing with the Great Resignation, organizational change in the post-pandemic world. So as you all know, we have gone through pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then post-pandemic. So what has been changing? So many employees, it may be in your companies, but you have actually seen them like voluntarily resigning from the jobs, and this is mainly because they may have different priorities now. So we're actually going to discuss on how companies can adopt management and organizational practices that will keep employees engaged as well as productive in light of the change expectations around work in a post-pandemic world. So just a few ground rules before I introduce our speaker for the day. For better audio purposes, we have actually muted everyone since entry, so you may have noticed that you are on mute. So if you have any questions or anything, you can just put them in the chat and we'll be able to follow up accordingly. And to actually give our speakers some support, do react. So I just want to test out, can you use the reaction button? So can anyone just give me a thumbs up? Let's see if I can see it. Okay, I see many thumbs up coming in. All right, so while our speakers are speaking, and if you see like, oh, I resonate with this, you can just give a thumbs up or give a clap emoticon, and that will be like the way of cheering because we are online and we are all muted. So in a way, that's silent cheering. So yeah, without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. So it's actually Mr. Eugene Lam here with us, and he is actually our SIMG Associate Lecturer for Graduate Diploma in Human Resource Management, and also the Group Head of Talent and Commercial HR Leader in ST Engineering. So without further ado, I will hand over the time to Eugene. Eugene, over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Stephanie, and good evening to everybody. I'm not too sure if there are folks who have dialed in from the region. I suppose if you are dialing in from Asia Pac, it should be evening for most people. I guess in India it would be slightly earlier, but welcome all of you to this webinar. So I'm pretty excited to speak to all of you. This is a hot topic, obviously. I'll be also very curious to know how many folks out there are HR leaders, right, and HR practitioners or keen in the subject of HR. But as you know, we all resonate with this statement, right, that people challenges and talent challenges is not a HR challenge, right? It's a business challenge. And so, this topic, I think, regardless of the function you're in, is going to be something of interest, I think, to all of us. Okay, so, to get me all started, I'm going to, hopefully, you can see my screen. Just want to tell all of you that I actually cannot see all of you, okay, now that I'm actually on screen mode. But if you do have any messages in chat, please, you can just put on your message and Stephanie will help us to moderate that and provide with the feedback, okay, as we go along. So, to get us going, let me maybe take this time to share some introductions in case you're wondering my background. So as I talk through and discuss this topic, right, you get a sense of my background. I actually started my career on scholarship, actually, with the Armed Forces here in Singapore. For those of you who are Singaporeans who serve national service, I'm an armor officer by vocation. So I spent my firstborn serving in the military. And quite interestingly, as part of my rotations, right, I did spend 4 years in the Ministry of Defense, interestingly, as the head of career planning for the Army. So while I did my combat tenure, I did spend some time doing work related to HR. After my bond ended, I left, and you can see the rest of my history. After a short initial stint in PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was a consultant with their change business. This was quite interesting for me because it was my first commercial job in that sense. And I learned very much actually in the consulting business because I was part of the public sector practice, which essentially spent a lot of time with statutory boards and government entities, right? Looking at how do you change culture, right? How do you sort of revisit the vision and mission statement, right, of the stat board? And how do you start to transform, right, and be a bit more of a facilitator of the industry versus a regulator of the industry, right, which is what government is known for, right? So it's a very interesting time. This was in the early 2000s, so many government stat boards were trying to learn, right, what it means to be a bit more facilitator in approach. So some of the work and projects that I did were very memorable, and it gave me a very good first insight into organizations and what makes an organization tick, right? By structure, by culture, and so on, right? But shortly after that, I did tell myself uh, that maybe I should be looking at doing a real job, right? And this is something I guess may not be a nice thing for consultants to hear, and so I decided to do HR, right? I figured that since, I spent some time in the Ministry of Defense doing career planning, and the consulting work that I did was related to change management, change strategy, and so on. I guess HR would be my calling, and my first HR job was with Accenture. And I still remember being this Singapore HR manager for the Singapore office. And the rest was history. I think if you look at my career, I spent the large part of my career, firstly, in tech companies, I would say professional services and tech. Even when I moved to IBM, I was supporting their global business services practice, which was very much their consulting business, right? So it was very much a services outfit. And of course, in subsequent years between HP, Applied Materials, Juniper, I was in mainly the tech sector. And you can see by my job title that I supported businesses quite intimately over the years. Meaning to say, I supported the president of Asia Pac, the global leader for services in applied materials. And I guess over the course of my career, I've seen how, I guess, business leaders face challenges. And obviously, in the last 20 years, we've gone through quite a bit from one financial crisis to the next. And of course, the most recent tumultuous event was COVID-19, right? So it's an interesting last, I would say, 10 to 15 years of my career, where it's been pretty intense. And my most recent move was really to ST Engineering. It's interesting because, as you know, ST Engineering is a global engineering company. For those of you who don't know, it's an $8 billion global tech company. Although it started its roots as a Singapore-based defense-focused business, over the last just 20 years, right? It's about 55 years now, this company. But over the last 20 years, it has gone global, right? And of the $8 billion, half of that actually comes from overseas. You can tell I play two portfolios there. One, I'm heading talent for the group and the enterprise. The other is I'm looking after HR for their new commercial cluster that was formed, right? That's probably about a $4 billion business, right? Just half of the total revenues of the company. So I play a global role in the company, and it's been quite an interesting 12 months for me. I've been there just about a year. And so with that, let me just move quickly. Now that you know where I'm coming from and my background, and obviously the lessons I've learned and the scars that I've taken over the years, here's what I would suggest that we cover today, right? I'm going to spend some time maybe in the first section, right, to maybe just set the context, right, just to understand, hey, what's happened in the last 2 3 years, right? Why this whole great resignation, right? And as you know, the so-called great resignation, or in fact, if you check up Wikipedia, right, it started the word that started was called the Big Quit, right? And of course, it was started by a professor from the University College of London, right, who predicted some economic changes, but including the fact that people will start to so-called migrate from companies. And true enough, right, this big quit became popularly known as the Great Resignation. So after talking about the context, I think I'll switch gears and perhaps spend a bit of time looking at the Great Resignation, and of course make some suggestions, right? I suppose of what at least ST Engineering is attempting to do in retaining our talent, and discuss what I think and what I've observed over the last 1 year. What sort of work, what's still work in progress, and like many of you there, still trying to crack the code, right, on how do we retain our people, right? Because I also realize, talking to my peers out there, that this phenomena is not unique to ST Engineering. I think most companies, I think all of you out there would probably resonate with me, is experiencing the same thing, right? And of course, finally, as we discuss that, right, I want to sort of switch the page on what we think are imperatives for us in HR, right? And I would say not only HR, but just organizations, right? What things should we be considering, right, during this period? And I'll just share really very much what I've learned, and I'll be very keen to I suppose learn from you, and if you've got ideas too, right, on what your companies are doing. Okay, so let me just get going, and let's cover some of the contextual issues. So firstly, right, I think it's important to sort of understand, right, what was the pandemic's impact, right, on employees in two areas. What employees are thinking and how are they actually feeling. And I must say that when I was doing some research, I mean, apart from what I experienced myself, but uh, I thought the study done by Mercer, right, on the rise of relatable organizations, I thought that was pretty relevant in some of the thinking and some of the stats that they put out, right? So you can see here, there are basically a few areas that's happened, right? One, it's quite clear that employees are starting to rethink their priorities, right? And interestingly, if you look carefully, right, at this rethinking of priorities, right, it's people, I suppose, think carefully, right? What was the pandemic all about? Right? If you recall, suddenly we learn new terms, right, around lockdown, quarantine, stay home notice. Remember all those familiar words, temperature checks and so on, right? And for a while, obviously, it was beyond social distancing, right? We were locked down, we were kept at home, and some of us are lucky enough to have homes that were easy to work from home. Not everybody had it easy. I remember my colleagues at that time, I was still in Danaher, my colleagues in India, my colleagues in Hong Kong. And if you guys know some of the homes in Hong Kong, they're not exactly very conducive for work from home. So it's a very tough time, right, across the globe. Huh? For those of us who work in first world countries, I think we could be a bit luckier. And also, look, think about parents, right? Imagine kids running around the house, and so it wasn't easy. And I think that got a lot of people, right, especially in countries where the death rates were going up in the thousands, right? And I hate saying it, right? In the US, in India, it was, when these things happen, people start to rethink. And that's no surprise, right? Coming close to home, if you look at some of the pointers that Mercer spotted, right, in their study, right? I no longer want to work at all. This profession probably is not right for me, and maybe this company is not for me. This whole rethink, right? about my job and my career, is that really a priority? So that sort of started to shift. Okay, and also if you look at employees today, right, in terms of their energy levels, in 2019, a Mercer study said about 74%. Quite clearly, it was almost a 10-point drop, right? In fact, it was more than that, right, down to 63%, right, when they did that survey, right? And obviously, if you look at it by gender and by generation, you see a loss of energy in general. And if you look again on the right, employees who feel burnout, it's interesting, right? That's sort of gone up to 81%, right? There was no footnote here on HR, but those of you on this call who are from the HR community, you know how tough it has been for us, right? We were thinking frantically of things like, how are we going to reschedule our people? What policy should we put out there? Should they work from home? Should they not? And those of you like myself who are looking after the region, it got a bit more complicated, right? Because the governments in every country also had their own rules and regulation, right? And then corporate headquarters in the US or otherwise also wanted to sort of overlay that, right? This whole work from home policies. And, not every organization was digitally ready. So clearly, number one, right, the first context was, hey, it got employees to think. Now, you may say that, hey, it's now 2022. But we are really, if you really think about it, we're just sort of, you know, taking different measures, right? Getting out of COVID. But now I think you saw this video that's been going around. What XBB is it? I don't know what's the new strain and all. And for a while, monkeypox was a bit of a threat and all. So we're not really out of the woods. But I think many organizations that are starting to, of course, peek their head forward. And we have seen, obviously, big moves, right? At least in the aerospace business, the airlines business, hospitality, things are starting to show a change and a pivot, right? With measures being more open, travels being more open, and so on. But we're not clearly totally out of the woods. And I think many employees, although this is, you could argue it could be dated because it's early in the year, I think it's still very relevant, right? Because it would still linger in us, right? What really makes sense, okay? The second context, I think, that's important for us to look at is what did companies learn from the pandemic? Okay, so firstly, maybe this was really way back in 2020. There was a report that was put out. And it was interesting when I looked at the responses because at that time, again, I was in Danaher and these responses resonated with me. So, for all of you out there, I'm not sure if your companies did the same, but clearly, number one, companies quickly responded to say, hey, please, work from home, right? And of course, as you know, in Singapore, the rules kept moving up and down, right, depending on the pace of the virus. It was work from home, it was not, it was wear mask, it was, and so, but clearly remote work and modified schedules, right, came to play quite quickly, right? So, you have shift A, shift B, so that we want to make sure, I still recall very fresh in my head, right? Not more than 50% of the population in the office can be in at any one time and so on, right? So a lot of this remote work was one. Secondly, there was a quick switch to health and safety. It was quite clear that companies started either providing masks or hand sanitizers and making sure that we had policies, if you had factories and all that, that people checked in and they took their temperature. If we had delivery people coming, they had to take their temperature and so on. So there was a whole focus. And finally, of course, it disrupted supply chains crazily, right, around the world, right? So this whole idea of production, distribution, and logistical support, companies started to look at alternatives, okay? So these were three quick responses. I added others because this was in 2020, right? I will share my own experience. By 2020 quarter three, right? My organization already, right, downsized by 40%, right? So personally, for me, it was a very tough time because it was not very fun for me, frankly, to exit 40% of my colleagues in the region. And this was Asia Pacific. No one was spared. Even high growth countries like India, um, even mature countries like Japan, no one was spared, right? So it was a very intense period for me in 2020 in quarter three. Obviously, quarter two was looking at all these remote stuff and health and safety, and then concurrently we were already looking right at layoffs and also a strategy reset. Right, companies were already thinking, right, what happened, right, and I still remember very clear in my mind. The focus was on protecting cash flow. That was key, right? Because I think many companies realized that revenue is not going to be what 2019 is. Clearly not, right? I think our revenues dropped by more than 50%, right? And depending on your industry, I mean, sadly, if you were from hospitality and airlines, it was very tough, right? I mean, Singapore Airlines had a huge hit. So, I saw layoffs and we had to execute. I did mention here, but furloughs. Some of you would know that that's all about part-time work, right? Or no pay leave, right? So, and then, on a personal front, some of the senior leaders, for example, myself and so on, we had to take a salary cut, and salary cuts were anything between 5 to 10%, right? So you took a salary cut, you went for no pay leave, and those of you who know what no pay leave compensation or computation is, that's probably equivalent to about 25% of your salary cut. So very intense 2020 for me. Again, I don't know what you guys went through, but it's still fresh in my head. And of course, other actions. One of them I call out here was digital. Of course, digitizing the entire workplace, right? Because now you're forced to work from home, and clearly, I think Zoom became quite famous overnight. If they were not already popular, right? But there were a lot of these apps that were up, and the focus on digital and working remotely became a big thing. Okay, so what did companies learn? Wow. Okay, I think if you look at the Mercer study again, right? There were a couple of things they learned. I mean, obviously, uh, there was a great reset. I think the word is reset, right? Around work, around workplace, around the workforce, because suddenly, right, you realize that firstly, you can work remotely. I think for some of you out there, your organizations may be a little bit allergic to people working from home, but suddenly you realize that you actually can work from home. But while that was good for uh, some employees, it was not great, right? Because working from home, as I said, wasn't conducive for everyone. But clearly, I think many found that the flexibility, of having to work from home. So business models started to change, which is an interesting point, right? Because if you think about it carefully, traditionally today, if I to hire people into my office in Singapore, think about it, right? If you can work from home, what does that mean? Why do you need to hire someone from Singapore, right? And we are probably one of the most expensive labor, right, on this planet, right? Apart from Korea and some of these first world countries, right? So there was a shift, right, and a bit of rethinking. And clearly, the second area was real estate, right? Do you really need so much office space, right? Because if people can work from home, and of course, companies started to rethink, right? Should we look at what jobs should be working from home and which jobs should be hybrid and so on and so forth, right? So it's interesting, right? There was one realization. I mean, if you look down the list, I'll just call out a few that I thought was more interesting. Uh, Clearly, the point on digital is huge, right? I think the world realized that, we cannot do without digitization and the application of technology, right? So that was a huge piece. The other thing was companies realized, the whole investment on health and well-being. And I think many of us hear this note called mental wellness, right? It suddenly became a really important facet, right, of employee benefits, right? So these things started to sort of bubble up, right? And companies learn a lot. Right? I'm sure the list is longer than this, huh? and I'm sure that you guys will have your own experience. Okay, so that's the second context. The third is really about what's the environment today. So I'm moving a little bit out of the impact of the pandemic, right? Context one and two is very much about the pandemic and the impact on employees, on productivity and organizations and so on. But context three is really just what's really happening today post-COVID, right? What are some of the biggest concerns that has come up in the past 1 year? And if you look at the top right, what's keeping the C-level guys up, right? And I'm not surprised because, cyber risk and data security, because everyone has gone digital now. And I think we've probably heard, right? As you now become more cashless, and as you know, many places in Singapore started going cashless, right? Because you don't want to be, touching things and so on. And but guess what? That does open other risks, right? You solve one problem, you create other possibilities, which is cyber security challenges, data breaches, and so on, right? So that came up as one. Obviously, business resilience was a hot one because when you go through a shock like this, right, meaning to say your revenues suddenly drop, right, which means it does impact quite severely your profitability, and in many cases, in some companies, cash flow. And you need cash flow to survive, right? Because you obviously need to pay your employees still and so on. So business resilience was one that was a concern, right? And of course, people started to migrate and leave and resign, right? So business resilience became a hot topic. And of course, we talked about digital. And the other bit was new work models, right? What new ways of working should we be considering, right? The other concerns below is really specific to workforce and people. And because one of the impact is people are leaving, and because of that migration, and if you look at Singapore, right, just specific to Singapore, um, uh, uh, you read the news, right? ICT skills, infocom skills, tech skills, software engineers. Wow, hot demand, right? And one of the challenges is we can't keep nor hire people quick enough, right? Also, I think after the last 1-2 years, there is generally fatigue. Those of you who have been working online remotely, while flexibility is good, being disconnected from the office and so on has other challenges, right? So there's general employee fatigue, and of course, loss of talent at this time. Okay, so that's really very much the business. And then what about HR concerns and priorities, right? I thought I listed some. I think if you look at different reports, Gartner reports and so on, I decided to pick Mercer for simplicity. No surprise, right? Uh, the fact that organizations started to downsize or reorganize itself and so on for efficiency and so on. One of the top priorities is about the workforce, right? Should we now be borrowing more than buy, right? That means, should we be hiring permanent hire, or should we be really looking at contract staff, right? Because people are now nervous, right? If you hire a whole bunch of people, then what's going to happen, right? If the pandemic continues and the virus has different strains and so on, right? What do you do with everyone? But if you don't hire, you have another challenge, right? What if the business wave comes, right? Which today, I've been traveling the last 6 months, and when I was in Europe and in the US, wow, big challenges, right? I realized that I was trying to get in and out of Belgium. There's now only one flight. And it's quite crazy, right? Because I realized the airports are finding it a hard time, right? Because they exited quite a few people from the airlines, from hospitality. And now when they're trying to rehire people back, um, uh, um, it becomes challenging, right? So what do you do with workforce planning, right? Then, of course, if you look down, it's now also looking at talent processes around skills, looking at what the business, what has emerged, how do you sort of now think through, right? Skills that are critical to your business, right? As you start to sort of evolve and change, okay? And then I would say if you look at 3 and 4, which is around rewards and pay. I don't know about you guys, but wow, that's a hot thing, man. And even five, right? Three, four, five, right? It's all around total rewards, compensation, and so on, right? Because suddenly I realize people are getting offers between 20 to 40%, depending which skill area you're in, right? So the market is really hot, right? But if we would think about business, I'm also half wondering how that can actually be sustainable. But obviously there's pent up frustration, right? Because of wage stagnation and obviously with inflation that has kicked in big time. Um, Obviously, that's one natural reason why people are migrating to, right? Because they get higher offers, and unfortunately, that's a bit of a domino effect. So it's been quite crazy in the market, right? People are getting offers at all rates. So if you look at these top 10 priorities, this is what the research has found out for this year, right? But I think that's going to remain largely the same. I think that's going to be a challenge this year going into next year. So, okay. So with that, let me maybe switch gears now that we've sort of set the stage on the context, right? I think it's good now for us to turn to how do we sort of translate, right, this great resignation uh, to retention. And I thought what I'll do is, I thought this extract that I found, again, is the Mercer's 2022 study. I thought it was quite interesting because here lists what they have found out, right, post-pandemic. And as they looked around the globe, right, in their survey, they found what were the top 10 uh, areas, right, that employees and companies are seeing that are critical, right, that employees are saying, hey, this resonates with me, right? These are really important to me. Now, some of you may agree, may not agree, but it's a point of view, right? And it's always important to put something that's research based as opposed to purely anecdotal, right? But I could resonate with these, right? So if you look at this 10, right, it ranges from feeling valued for your contributions all the way down to leadership. And if I look at this carefully, I decided just call out perhaps the top five to discuss the top five, right? Because also in my own experience this past 1-2 years, I feel that these five areas um, uh, highlight, right, what I think are areas for organizations, for HR and business leaders to consider, right? How do you keep good people, right? How do you sort of keep them through this time when it's an employees market? These five things range around feeling valued, work that fulfills me, having fun at work, interesting point, okay, a sense of belonging, right, and manager advocacy, right? So I think instead of going through the 10, because I think it can be summarized, right, in these five areas, I think in the next couple of charts, this is where I'm going to talk about the imperatives, right? What I think is going to be relevant and important for HR and business leaders as we look now in switching, right, quickly to from great resignation to great retention. Okay. Okay. First, let's cover this first point on career and interesting work. Because if I pick the first 2 points that were raised by people, right, and these first 2 points were what work that fulfills me and feeling valued for my contributions. When I see that, and I look at why people are leaving us in the last 12 to 18 months, what's come up very clear in the top 3 reasons, and I'm very keen to hear from all of you on this call, you know, what are the reasons people are leaving in your company, or even you yourself, right? If you were part, well, I moved to SD Engineering last year in September, so I suppose I am part of the Great Resignation. But if you ask yourself, right, what's the reason? I suspect it's going to be this similar point, right? People are looking at different opportunities, things that are going to be more interesting, because depending on the industry you come from, that may have changed, right? What could have been interesting may not be so today, right? And you have decided to move on, or your employees and so on have decided to. So I just want to call out that that's one thing that's kind of struck me on this whole notion of career and interesting work. Yes, people leave for compensation and higher pay, but let's put it this way. Why would you leave if not for someone giving you a higher offer, right? But I think it's beyond that too, right? Sometimes it's about what work that's interesting, things that you're learning and so on. And perhaps the industry has, at least through COVID, right, has shown that, well, not so robust, right? And so look, uh, I found that career velocity and how companies now have to think, right, carefully, right? Are we clear about career paths? Meaning to say, today, are we very clear about what the next steps are for employees? And I want to be very candid here. I don't think there are many companies um, that have very, I would say, structured career paths, or if they exist, I'm also not sure if managers are clear. So I'll pick a simple example, right? A sales rep, someone who joins the organization in the sales function, right? He's a young guy, graduated, comes in, he's a sales rep. From a sales rep, he moves later on to be assistant manager. He moves to be a sales manager, later becoming the country sales director. Depending on the size of the business, he could become a key account management leader for a key account, right? He could then later become an area sales leader, again, depending on the country, right? If you're in India and Vietnam, this is quite common. You then later become a national sales director, and then, you become a regional commercial sales head and so on. So there's a certain career path. Now, I'm not too sure if every organization and many managers, and I have this hypothesis, right, because I've seen it myself, that this sometimes is not so clear. And that's why employees decide, hey, look, maybe it's worthwhile an organization approaching me, giving me an opportunity that, hey, I now look after a mini region, I get more exposure. And I don't think many organizations have frameworks that are too clear. And something for us to consider, right? How do we help employees and managers understand career paths, right? Career tracks, so to speak. And some of you are lucky enough, right, to be in organizations where they make it clear. But not everybody, every company has. And it's something to think about, because if you're not clear, employees will find their own clarity, right, somewhere else, right? There's sales path, there's technical path, there's the marketing path, and then within functions, it gets even more interesting, right? There's HR, there's finance, and we need to provide some clarity, right? The second area is this topic known as talent marketplace. This has become an interesting one because I noticed that some organizations, and this is a topic that Mercer has been trying, and some of the consulting companies have been trying to sell to me for ST engineering. But I must quickly say that this is a phenomena that I've seen a lot in the big four, the consulting companies like Accenture and so on. These companies, basically, what a talent marketplace means is that employees today are very interested in finding interesting jobs, right? If they can't find it internally, if a headhunter comes, a recruiter comes, they will look up. But if you allow an environment, right, where all your job opportunities are open, right? And some of you will tell me, yes, Eugene, my jobs are usually advertised outside, but are they advertised inside? And you may say yes, which is great, right? Some of you will have employee referral programs and so on. But some organizations are even more proactive, right? The talent marketplace is really a platform where employees can actually proactively see what jobs are out there from another business. In some companies, more gung-ho, in another geography, right? And the culture permits them to actually apply for these jobs, right? This is almost like a carousel or eBay, right? But instead of products and so on, it's jobs, internal jobs. And I've seen companies with cultures that support internal mobility, and it's very exciting, right? ST engineering has not gone down that path. I've sort of started that discussion with my HR leaders, but obviously, a talent marketplace requires some rules of engagement. If not, it will truly become a marketplace, right? You cannot have people just applying for jobs. It's very disruptive, right? You can't have people just, oh, I want to move after 3 months, I'm not happy. So there's some rules that you have to put in place, and obviously culture and change in mindset of managers obviously need to come in place before that can happen. But it's exciting, right? If your company is interested in embarking on something, it's very exciting, right? Because it really allows employees to pursue what they're passionate about, and sometimes in a very experimental way. Okay. The next area on career, on this whole topic, right, about work fulfillment is about just revisiting the 70-20-10. I think many of us on this call know what that is. It's really the growth model, right? How do you grow professionally, right? It's really through experience. The job that you do is through exposure, the feedback that you get, and it's through training, like education, and even like webinars like this, right? We all grow. And I think companies, and I've seen now, at least in ST engineering, is something wearing my talent hat that we're trying to engender, right? We focus a lot on 70. I mean, we are really aggressive in moving our top talent, in rotating them every 3 years for those on the rotational programs. But we are also trying to engender the fact that managers must learn to give good feedback. I don't know what all of you, your personal experience is, but for me, right, one of the greatest growth that I've been exposed to is having great managers. Great managers telling me very directly, without mincing their words, areas that I can be much better, right? And I thank those managers of the past, right, because they were so direct, and it was such a humbling experience. But it helped me to grow up tremendously, right? And I'm a strong believer that if we give good feedback to our people, and I don't think we do enough of that, right? It helps people to grow. So you need to rethink, right, in your own organizations. Our managers empowered and understand what it means to have good adult development conversations, and what other ways can we expose our people, right? And some companies use the mentor program, some companies, but it's an important area, right? We all always think that growing someone or in career, what is all about training and all that, right? And as you can tell, education is just 10%, right? So we sort of need to rethink that. And even in the area of education, we sort of need to rethink, right, what really is the best hybrid approach, because the whole notion of classroom training, I think, if we already do not realize, is starting to move off the grid, right? I think companies are going very much into online training and hybrid training. Obviously, there's still a strong place for classroom, but it's starting to move up. I don't know if you realize this, but if you speak to even senior level development programs, right? Remember, I don't know if you're familiar, but companies, even in ST and others that have been in, we send very senior folks to INSEAD, to the Harvard Advanced Management Programs, and so on, right? These are where you send quite senior folks there. But guess what? The face of senior executive education has also changed. If you talk to companies like Emeritus and Exec Online, that started to change, right? And so very exciting, but it also forces us as HR to think, right? What are ways and means, right? We have to keep our people excited, right? Helping them keep excited about their careers and so on by also investing in trading. Okay. And the last piece, of course, is about recognition. Now, this is the lowest hanging fruit. And I think companies can do and continue to do much better, right, in just recognizing our people, celebrating success, right, in big and small ways. Okay. The second imperative, which I want to get to, is now around this other area that's talked about. Having fun at work, maybe that's a strong word, and a sense of belonging, right? I think at least through the pandemic, right, it's quite clear that I suppose if you were around the last 2 years, you have a lot of new hires. And I'm not surprised if you go in the office and you suddenly like, oh, you joined us last year, but obviously it's COVID and nobody was around to, welcome you. And obviously, many companies have seen a bit of a disconnect if that's the right word to use, right? Because we're all working remotely, and if you think about it carefully, I think last year there were a few tech companies which I shan't name because I'm also not familiar if they have changed their position and their stand. But we hear companies saying that, hey, we are telling all employees forever from now you can just work from home, right? Or hey, look, it's up to you. I suspect, and again, I stand to be corrected, but I sense companies are also making a bit of a U-turn, right? If that's really also sensible, okay? Because I suppose we are all social beings, right? And the sense of connection is important. I think there's so much you can do virtually like this. It's nothing like sitting across the table and having coffee and having a conversation. So I think this creating a community and creating connections, right, is starting to feature again, right? Because people will wait for a while. And I'll just call out a few things that I think has kind of worked for organizations. And one of it is really engendering the whole diversity and inclusion agenda, right? In the past 1 year in ST Engineering, we spent some time talking with the senior leadership team and the top 200 leaders, right, about D&I, right? And D&I, I would say, at least as the first step in a company like ST Engineering, is really around gender, around generation, right? The mix of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, however we class them, and the mix of geography or nationalities, because we feel that these areas of diversity can cause a bit of distancing, right? And we wanted to engender that partly. Well, firstly, we feel that we want to do much better, right, in our representation in these areas. But more importantly, in the inclusion space, right? How are we including, right, these communities? Meaning to say, like women at ST Engineering, I'm proud to say that it's a huge council that we have. I must say, in my 25 years of HR career, I've not found a place that's so active in the gender space, right? So we're really active, and thanks to many of the female leaders that I have, right? We're doing all sorts of things, and we're trying to find connections, right, among that community. Also in the generation space, we're also realizing, because obviously we have a lot of top talent, uh, scholars who come into our organization, and we feel, yeah, it's important for us to have that connect, right? And we, apart from having basic engagement roundtables and focus groups, we are also thinking, right, how we can better connect the dots with this group. And the area of nationality, right? Being a global tech company, right? How do we also help to connect the dots, right, with these folks who are with us? And one of the ideas we have put across was employee resource groups. I think those of you here on the call work for US companies. These include things like Asian Americans, Hispanics, and so on, right? But closer to home at ST Engineering, we don't have that, of course, but we're also looking. Right now, we only have women at ST Engineering as one of the employee resource group. But we are also trying to think, like, how do you build better connections? One thought was maybe all new hires, right? Because it's a big organization, and new hires often find it not so easy to navigate, right? So how do you sort of help new hires? We also want to consider other types of groups, and we're sort of exploring that as we go along, okay? And finally, just to let you know, one of the ways we want to build greater connection is this point on unconscious bias. Now, some of you, again, not new to you, right? But I would say at ST, we sort of launched it in a big way this year, at least to the leadership group. And we felt it was an important point, right? Because if you want to build better connections across genders, generation, and geography, we need to make sure that our managers and our leaders understand, right? How do we operate, right, under this notion of unconscious? We'll always have bias, all of us, right? But how do we now become much more self-aware as we deal, right, with people across different diverse groups? We also started to ramp up our CSR activities. I would say my business unit, in a very small way, we We went to Willing Hearts. I suppose there are many other places you can go to. I was pleased to say that I met, I think UBS was there. I think SIA was there. I think I even met DBS Bank, right? Some of the employees there. So it's great to see companies doing that. And I just want to encourage you, if your company has not considered that, it's low cost. I think the effort, frankly, is minimal, because most of, like, Willing Hearts, it's a platform that's ready for you. It's just plug and play, right? It's just you organizing employees. But I realized that when you organize employees to do give back, this kind of community work, firstly, there's something that happens, right, when people get together and do something to give back to society, right? And you build different connections and community, right? So I found that to be a good way to also create this sense of belonging, right, among employees. And the last piece on sense of community, I don't know about you guys, but yeah, we are starting to ramp up our, we wanted to do Oktoberfest, but obviously October is almost over, and I think we're a bit late. We'll probably do our own version of Novemberfest. But just different businesses are also looking at ways to get um, employees back as much as we can. I would say that maybe it's unique to ST Engineering, but we made it quite clear to our businesses that, hey, look, the default now is please come back to the office. Now, obviously, it does not mean that we are not flexible, right? We do have people working from home, of course, right? But we're hoping that we'll create more communities, right? Because I think that's important. And I think that's one way of creating retention, right? Beyond just the other traditional needs. Okay. Okay, so let me move on. And I think the last sort of imperative that I'll put out there is leadership, right? I guess there was one point that was raised about managers being advocates, right? I just want to call out that I think we all know this, right? This is not a new notion, that at the end of the day, leaders set the culture, right? Leaders, inspiring or otherwise, they set the pace for organizations. And this year was a year that, again, we doubled down, right? We launched in March, April this year, a manager development roadmap, because we realized that in a company like ST, at least, we have 15,000 employees locally, another 10,000 overseas. You can't touch everybody, right? Even the CEO giving his big, you can't touch everyone. At the end of the day, I think every leader needs to play his part. And at the lowest denominator, we found it is the manager, right? Who actually has that conversation with our employees, right? That manager who sits at the factory, right? At the end of Tuas, right? With his 20, 30 men, right? The manager who's sitting in the commercial office with the sales team. So those are the really high touch points. And we decided that, hey, if we can build great managers, wouldn't the world be a better place? Or rather, I think it would solve at least 1/3 of our engagement issues, right? And so we built basically a model and a framework of thinking about how do you first lead yourself, right? For non-managers, people we are preparing to become managers. And then when you become managers, what kind of attributes and competencies do we expect out of you, right? And then later on, you may become a manager of managers, right? You are a second tier manager, right? And what kind of other competencies and attributes do you need? And so we sort of built this framework on building managers. And since April, I would dare say that, yeah, we spend considerable time building our managers and launching programs to build better managers out there. Okay. So with that, I maybe Stephanie, I'll pass the time back to you. I just want to thank all of you for your attention, and maybe Steph, I will leave you either to moderate or I'll pass the time back to you. Okay.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing as well. While you were sharing, there were actually a few discussions going on.
Okay.
They were agreeing to your points actually. Like people no longer want to work just for just working for the sake of working. And also there was actually one question in here. from
Okay.
Eddie. So Eddie was actually asking, Prudential has removed the retirement age and many employees welcome it to maintain lifestyle. Will this be considered across Singapore organizations? So I think he wants to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah.
Okay, and you're talking about retirement age, right?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. So look, I think those of you who run regions, and it's interesting. I was talking to my Japanese HR director. This was a couple of years back. I can't remember. I think the retirement age, interestingly, is 60, right? But they have a slightly different rule, right? After 60, you are sort of required to go back to employees and to consider them for annual contract renewal. So slightly different, although the age is lower. Singapore, as you know, has moved that up to 63, right, as I understand. And it, I think with the target to move it to 65. I want to say that, look, I think the writing is quite clear. I think generally lifespans, I think you read all these kind of reports, right? I don't know what was the average lifespan in Singapore years back, but clearly with better healthcare and better awareness and knowledge of looking after our health, it's been quite clear, right? Our health, our lifespan is moving up. And I want to say that again, without speaking on companies' behalf, it's quite clear the government is moving towards shifting our retirement age, right? And I would say that if you are a company based in Singapore, I want to imagine that eventually that will happen. Again, I cannot speak for all multinationals because obviously you have to abide by the country's regulations, right? So as it moves, that will happen. Look, on the other hand, too, you will realize very quickly that companies are also realizing that you're losing experience. And it's interesting. And by the way, guys, I'm Gen X, right? So I've obviously looked at CEOs of different eras, and I've worked with business leaders of different era. And I must say that over the years, I need to be careful what I say here. It's not so much that I see general managers lose the experience, right? But the earlier generation leaders that I work for are pretty different, I must say, right? And to be fair, right, they grew up in a very different environment. Today, many leaders that become leaders today come up from the digital age, right? Whereas the earlier leaders did not. So it's a very different. So it's unfair to make the comparison. But what I'm trying to say is that you clearly will need, I think, senior folks in the organization. Not all, but you clearly need senior leaders, right? Because experience, right? Those of you who are in the Singapore Armed Forces or who are familiar with the Singapore Armed Forces, you realize, right, batch after batch, because we keep the army quite young or the SAF quite young, you realize that experience levels start to lose quite quickly. So I'm not surprised if companies will keep that selectively, right? And from a societal standpoint, it makes sense, right? Let's put it, if you're the government, would you want a lot of retirees hanging out there? I'm not sure, right? You want to encourage that, right? People to be out there working and still contributing to the economy. Yeah. Okay,
Right.
good. I hope that answers
There.
your question. Yeah. Thanks
Yeah,
for asking.
actually, there is another question from Eddie as well. So Eddie wanted to know, like, are there any tips for mid-career switchers to avoid taking up intern roles when moving across industries and also continue the career path upwards? So, like,
Okay.
that is like what transferable skills are leaders looking at from mid-career folks crossing over? Yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting question, Eddie. So I think what is interesting is that firstly, you got to understand, right? For every role that is open today, depending on the level, right? What do hiring managers and HR look for? Quite clearly, the first thing I'll look at, depending on the seniority of the role, is what is your experience? What did you do the last time, right? If I'm hiring a marketing manager, obviously I would like to make sure that you understand marketing, you have done some things in marketing, and especially in today's age, you need to have some experience in digital marketing, right? Digital footprinting and data analytics and so on, consumer analytics. So now, if you didn't have that experience, if you want to do mid-career switches, firstly, listening or hearing, just thinking from the employer standpoint, right? He would be probably taking a risk, right? So when you say mid-career switch, I'm making the assumption that you are moving out of function, right? So it's something to carefully think about, because remember, right, for every good job, there's 5 to 10 people who are equally, if not more qualified than you are, right? They're very good talent in Singapore. So if you're planning to do a switch out of your primary function, consider carefully. I would also say very quickly that obviously everyone tells you pursue your passion. So it's true, right? If you are, let's say, in financial services and you're really tired, I really need to do a mid-career switch. Now, obviously, I'm not going to stop you, right? Because you know yourself best. And I think it's true. We need to pursue our passions, what makes sense to us, because you want to wake up every morning excited, right? Not drag your feet to the office. I would only say this, think carefully, because if you are willing and ready to start from the bottom, because as I say, it depends what you mean by mid-career, right? As I said, if you're looking to switch to marketing, let's say, and you are always in accounting, right? Think carefully, right? Because it does mean that you have to start at a particular level, right? And if I suppose if your situation can allow for it, why not, right? Pursue what I think is most important, right? What drives you and keeps you awake. Okay, so I hope that that little advice helps. The other option I'll tell you is this: who will make a risk and investment on you? Actually, it's your own company. So if you're a good employee, I would dare say this, right? If today I'm in HR and suddenly I raise my hands and I tell my business leaders, hey, I think I want to be a business leader. I want to get to the business side suddenly, right? I want to be a commercial leader. Guess what? If you're a really good employee, most companies will take the risk on you. So my advice, frankly, is if your company will allow you, I know it sounds bad, do it in your company first, right? Because your company knows you best. The other employee, I will be surprised if they will take a risk on you, right? Unless they are hiring in droves and let's say software engineering and you decided to switch, and then yeah, I think, right? If not, if your company is willing to take the risk, why not? Because you can start learning the ropes and later on either grow in your company or do something else somewhere else. Okay, I hope that helps. Yeah, thanks, Steph.
Thank you so much for the suggestions. I think it also helped. Eddie also said thanks. Since we're running a little bit tight on time, if you have any more questions, you can still put it in the chat. We'll address them after the program briefing. And I would like to thank Eugene again for sharing a very, very insightful masterclass session.
Yep.
Now, I actually have another speaker with us today to actually share with you more about the program that we have here in SIM, which is the Graduate Diploma in Human Resource Management. So we actually have Dr. Joshua with us next up. So Dr. Joshua Wong is actually our head of program for this program itself, and he will take us through the program briefing. And yeah, let me hand it over to you, Dr. Joshua.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
loud
All
and
right.
clear.
That's good. Thank you very much. I want to thank Eugene as well for taking the time off to give this talk. Eugene is one of our lecturers in the Graduate Diploma of Human Resource Management. I thought I'll also take this time just to share a little bit about the program that we run. And to give you, if any of you are interested in finding out more about human resource management, about perhaps think that education for mid-career switchers or even for moving up management. I think HR is one of those functions where a lot of managerial staff will need some knowledge of, right, in order to better manage your people, in order to plan company strategy. Most managerial positions and supervisory positions also will encourage employees to learn the basics of HR at least, right? So for those of you who are thinking of moving up in them in your organization, or to perhaps laterally transfer to a different industry, HR may be a good option for you, right? So let me just introduce a little bit about the Graduate Diploma in Human Resource Management. Right. Yeah, I think Eugene has also pointed out, right? This new economy really requires HR professionals to develop and manage this roadmap to drive innovation and productivity now within this new post-pandemic world, trying to create a quality work life, especially with the new stresses now that have been introduced in the pandemic. And so optimization of human resources, how do we best create a work environment and work culture that can make maximum use of the resources that our company has access to, has become more and more strategic to the success of organizations, especially in this world now. Now that we're dealing with the Great Resignation, how do we retain good talent? And how do we develop good talent to address the needs in this new, brave new world? Right. And so this graduate diploma in human resource management program really aims to equip you with the relevant skills and the practical knowledge to meet the changing job demands for the human resource development and management roles. Right. It also equips you with specialized knowledge, especially in terms of employee recruitment, selection, training and development, as well as knowledge management and performance management. Right. So things like, okay, performance appraisals, how do we structure a good reward scheme for management, for our employees, so that they feel motivated, they feel that work is fun, they feel that their work is meaningful as well, right? And that's part and parcel of what we teach at the GDHRM program. If you're interested in joining us, so these are the testimonials from one of our graduates, Derek, who graduated in 2021, right? So he said basically that this program has broadened and deepened his knowledge of HR, and at the same time, he's able to then appreciate how HR as a function and his role personally as HR manager can become a strategic partner to the organization. He helps them now plan their strategy, right, for this public transport company that I cannot name, but yeah, he works alongside them now to really think about, okay, how can HR support them as they grow or as they maintain their job functions. Yeah, and HR, of course, is one of those functions which nearly every business needs, right? There's ample employment opportunities in both private and public sectors, because everyone does need someone in charge of taking care of the people, developing the employees, recruiting, and in the unfortunate circumstances, also helping employees exit, right? So in the GDHRM program, you can attend to not just get the education that you need to look for perhaps a different change of job function to the HR, but it also helps you acquire the business know-how that you need to move up into supervisory or managerial positions. Now, what exactly is in this program structure? So the GDHRM program is a one-year program where there are 6 modules altogether taught over 3 terms, each term lasting about 4 months, right? So in the January to April term, we teach managing organizational change and development. So things like, for example, how do we introduce changes into a company? Right? How do we manage employees' resistance to changes? How do we build for innovation? Yeah. And this is obviously becoming more and more relevant now that a lot of companies are digitalizing, are trying to change their work practices, the work from home structures, the new ways of helping employees, mental wellness schemes, things like that. Other things can include, the other module that's being taught in the January term is the employment relations and law, right? So things like, for example, okay, what are the legal processes involved in hiring talent as well as managing talent? How do we handle trade unions? How do we handle labor unions? What are the employees' rights and responsibilities? What are the employers' rights and responsibilities? How does a company manage relationships with their employees, either individually or as a group? In the May term, we teach two other modules. One is on international human resource management. So when you're working for an MNC, a multinational company, how do you handle HR on a strategic global level, right? So if you're a regional manager, if you're perhaps even a global C-suite manager, right? Now that we're living in a world where people can work from home, you can hire from overseas, how do you manage that? How do you source for the best talent around the world? How do you deal with different HR laws and regulations across different companies? How do you deal with different workplace cultures across different companies, right? What may work in Europe may not work in Asia Pac. What may work in Asia Pac may not work in Latin America. Right? So how do you deal with different workplace expectations, cultures, environments, policies across different countries as well, right? Also being taught in the May term is performance management and rewards. That one is very much focused on the HR function itself. Like how do you set good reward schemes to motivate your employees for things like bonuses, increments, things like, okay, how do we create a good performance appraisal scheme that would be fair to both employer and employee to help companies manage the performance and motivate the employees to perform well? How do we offer good competitive remuneration rates that would make our employees feel valued, right? And then, of course, in the September and December term, which is ongoing right now, we have two other modules. One is strategic human resource management, which talks about, okay, how does HR support the overall business strategy and the relationship between HR and business strategy as a whole. So it's very much large scale, big picture. Okay, what needs does the company have? How do we start planning for how to recruit the right talent that is needed, the right skills that you can foresee the company will need in order to grow, or sometimes in order to shrink. What things are, what function perhaps can be reduced, yeah, or turned to borrowed rather than bought, right? And Eugene, for example, is currently teaching the staffing and employee development module, which is about how do we train our staff? How do we develop a good training scheme? How do we make sure we hire the right people with the right skills, and make sure that we try to develop them to fulfill their maximum potential, right? What works in terms of good training schemes, what motivates people to want to learn, to grow in the company, right? So this is just to give you an overview of the one-year program that we do, right? So when you study with the GDHRM program, our classes are delivered on weeknights, usually 7 to 10 p.m. once a week per module. So if you're taking both modules, then it's twice a week. You'll be studying at night. And it's a mix of physical classes at SIM campus in Clementi, as well as online classes. Again, we deliver this mix of physical and online because we need both the group bonding experience and the social aspects of HR, as well as sometimes just to give flexibility to our students as well to manage their timetables. We have online classes as well. Yeah, so it's a mix of both. It's about half roughly. Okay. So if you're interested in coming with and getting this program, here's what you need to join, right? So our admissions criteria, all you need is basically a bachelor's degree from a recognized university, or if you're above 30 years old already and you have a diploma, if you're just a diploma holder or equivalent, have equivalent qualifications, but you have a minimum of 8 years working experience, we also welcome you to the GDHRM program, right? If your academic qualifications are not attained in English medium, perhaps you're studying overseas, you got your degree from another country, and it's not in English, then you also need to demonstrate proficiency in English, right? And the minimum total score is basically, if you have TOEFL, then it's paper-based TOEFL is 570, or internet-based TOEFL is 88. Or you can take the IELTS test, and you need a minimum score of 6.0. And all this, of course, needs to be within 2 years at the point of enrollment. So a recent score rather than a score that you may have taken several years ago. We have admissions every 4 months term. So we take in this 3 times a year in January, May, and September. Yeah, and then whichever term you start in, you start learning those 2 modules for, and you go 1 full round 1 year. Okay, so the 2 modules, the syllabus progresses throughout the entire year. You can start at any time, any term, and you finish 1 year later at the end of 6 modules, right? The program fees, the total for 1 year altogether is only Singapore $5,778. Yeah, and if you want to find out more, please go visit this website to learn about the details of how to apply. This is at sim.edu.sg/degrees-diplomas/admissions, right? And with a graduate diploma, you might want to ask, okay, if I want to go for even further studies beyond the graduate diploma, what can I do? So with a graduate diploma in human resource management, you can actually go on to apply for the Master of Management courses, which is a master's degree management track at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, just next door to SIM. Yeah, and upon meeting the conditions required, you can actually earn up to 10 units of credit recognition. So you can actually stay some time. You don't have to study the full course that's being offered at SUSS, but you can actually skip some modules because you've taken the graduate diploma in HRM as well. All right. So with that, that's all I have to share. So please do check out the link if you're interested, and I'll pass the time now back to Stephanie for any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshua. If you have any questions regarding the program or even regarding the masterclass, just feel free to put it in the chat and we'll address accordingly. Yeah, so the floor is open for you all. Asking question is actually a new thing to learn also. So learning not only from your end, but also from our end, because it's very thought-provoking for the person who gets asked the question. So it's good to hear everyone's opinions. And yeah, looking forward to all your questions coming in. I'll give you all maybe like a couple minutes for you to think through. And if you have any questions, just feel free to put it in the chat. Thank you. But of course, if you want to maybe like discuss or share your opinions, like what you agree, what you don't agree, you can still put it in. We can bring it to discussion within this group of people as well. Yeah. Okay. There's a question from Jia. So she actually asked, I don't have HR experience, but would like to switch to HR. Can I take this grad diploma and will it help with interviewing for HR roles? Maybe Dr. Joshua, you can take this. Yeah.
I would say yes. It definitely, okay. So I think Eugene shared at one point, right? The 70-20-10 rule, right? So with the graduate diploma, at least you have the 10%, and it will get you into the door for the interview. Hopefully, I think by listening, by listening to our lecturers, you can learn more as well. And you understand a little bit more about what the HR role involves, right? So at least you can make a better and more wise and informed decision about, okay, HR is actually quite a big field. What kind of HR job am I going into? And what perhaps is a better role for me within the field of HR as well, right? So that can help in choosing perhaps a more suitable role within the HR field. The other thing, of course, is that it will help you, I think, also be familiar with some of the terminology and concepts and the mindset of how companies think in terms of hiring and recruitment, in terms of what they're looking for in skills, right? And I think that can also be useful. The other plus point is that basically a lot of our students are also either in HR or transitioning into HR. So there is this element of networking and just building relationships, building bonds with other people who are also going into HR, yeah, or are in HR already, which can help you then find jobs. Yeah, or you can even talk to the lecturers. We have a very friendly, very experienced group of lecturers, as you can see from Eugene, which can help you, perhaps give you more advice on where to go in terms of how to transition into HR.
Okay, there is actually one more question from Eddie as well. So Eddie was asking, are there any job matching career placement for the graduates or any place and train programs like SCTP to ease the transition?
Right now, SIM, I think, of education and the career advisory and the career placement into two separate functions, right? So for the GDHRM program, we're more concerned with education and with training you with the knowledge you need, right? There is a separate department which focuses on career placement and career advancement and career opportunities, right? So unfortunately, I don't think we have anyone from career advisory here in this masterclass, but there is an office in in SIM, which focuses on that, and we can actually direct you to that if you're interested in finding out more about how how you can leverage what you've learned into perhaps career placement.
Right. We have one more question from Melissa. So Melissa was asking, is there any course fee subsidy for people above 40 years old? Do you want to take the question, or if not, I can take the question too.
Sure, Stephanie, go ahead and try.
Okay. So Melissa, unfortunately, we do not have any subsidies for this course at this point of time. So basically, the course fee that Dr. Joshua has shared is actually the final fee. But of course, this fee is not payable everything in one lump sum as well. It will be by each semester basis, so it's not so heavy on you as well. But unfortunately, right now we do not have it like any subsidies for now. Okay, sorry, Dr. Joshua, if you can help. Okay, so this is actually the course fees for the whole program. So it's 5,778 for the whole year.
It's payable, basically for every divided by 3. Should be about what, 1,006? Roughly around 1,006 per 4 months.
Okay, anyone else have any questions? Just feel free to put in and we'll take it. If you have any questions for Eugene as well, just feel free to let us know and we'll address over to Eugene. You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's not easy joining, like some of you may be working, joining after work, but it's always good to learn new things. Master classes, not only this, if you have time to join the other ones, we have like a new season coming up also. So just keep a lookout in our website and yeah, we'll take it from there. Okay, I think everyone might be if I think everyone probably get their answers already. So thank you so much to everyone once again for joining the class, and for Eugene and Dr. Joshua as well. Thank you so much for taking your time to share on the masterclass, on the program briefing. And I actually enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot of different perspectives of HR. And for those who actually joined with us, I hope you enjoy as much as I did. And hopefully this is something that you can consider as well for your next career chapter. And yeah, with that, if you have any further questions, just feel free to email us, which I'll be jotting it down here in the chat. You can email to study@sim.edu.sg, or you can call us at our hotline number, which is 62489746. And with that, thank you so much, and I hope you can have a great evening ahead. Thank you and good night. I'll end the session now.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.